A boot came down hard on a small hand. The boy yanked it back and bit down on a cry. Scraps of bread scattered across the sticky floor. A man laughed and kicked them away. The boy stayed on his knees, gathering what he could, not looking up, not making a sound. His ribs showed through a shirt 3 sizes too big. His feet were bare and blue at the toes. Somewhere behind him, a plate clattered onto a table, heavy with steak and beans, and the boy's whole body turned toward the smell. His name was Eli Hargrove, and he was 7 years old, and he had not eaten a full meal in longer than he could remember. Across the room, a giant of a man sat down alone with that plate. What Eli was about to ask him would freeze the entire saloon. Stay with me on this one. The Silver Spur was loud that night. It was loud most nights. Men came in off the trail with dust in their teeth and money in their pockets, and they spent both like they'd never see morning. Eli knew the rhythm of the place better than he knew his own heartbeat. He knew when to duck under a swinging arm. He knew which tables tipped and which ones held. He knew the exact spot on the floor where the boards creaked, and he'd learned to step around it, because a boy who made no sound was a boy nobody bothered to notice. That was the whole trick of staying alive in there. Don't be seen. Don't be heard. Sweep the floor, gather the bottles, wipe the spills, and disappear. He worked for scraps. That was the arrangement, though nobody had ever said it out loud to him. His mother worked the kitchen from before sunup to long past dark, and in exchange the owner let the 2 of them sleep in the storeroom behind the barrels. There was no money in it. There was never money in it. There was a roof, and there was whatever came back on the plates that men didn't finish, and most nights that was enough to keep a boy standing. Most nights. Some nights the men finished everything, or spat in their leavings out of meanness, or knocked the plates to the floor just to watch him scramble. Some nights Eli went to sleep with his stomach folded in on itself, listening to his mother hum low in the dark so he'd have something to hold onto besides the hunger. Her name was Clara. She was thin the way he was thin, and her hands were red and cracked from the wash water, and she had a way of touching the top of his head that made the whole rotten world go quiet for a second. She told him to keep his eyes down and his mouth shut. She told him that every single day. Keep your eyes down, Eli. Don't let them look at you too long. He never understood why she said it like that. Like being looked at was the dangerous thing. The owner was a barrel-chested man named Dutch Ferris, and he ran the Silver Spur the way a man runs a trap. Everything that came into that place, Dutch owned a piece of it. The whiskey, the tables, the girls upstairs, and in his own mind, the woman in the kitchen and the boy who swept his floors. He never hit Eli where it showed. He was careful about that. But he had a voice that could make a grown man flinch, and when he turned it on Clara, Eli watched his mother shrink down to nothing. So the boy learned to hate quietly. That's a thing a child can do. He learned it well. Now, on this particular night, the giant came in. Eli saw him from across the room and forgot for a moment to keep his eyes down. The man had to duck under the doorframe. His shoulders filled it side to side. He wore a long trail coat gone gray with dust, and his boots were the size of skillets, and there was a stillness in him that the loud men didn't have. The loud men were loud because they were afraid of something. This one wasn't afraid of anything. You could see it in the way he crossed the room. Men moved out of his path without deciding to. He sat down alone at the corner table, the one with its back to the wall. He set his hat down beside him, and when the plate came, it came piled high because Dutch always fed the big spenders well, and this one had the look of a man with a season's wages in his coat. Steak, beans, a heel of bread still warm. Eli stood frozen with his broom, watching the steam rise off it. He didn't decide to walk over. That's the truth of it. His feet just started moving. His mother would have grabbed his collar if she'd seen, but she was bent over the wash basin with her back to the room, and the giant was eating slow, and there was so much food on that plate that surely some of it would be left. Eli crossed the floor. He forgot the creaking board and stepped right on it, and it groaned under his bare foot, and the giant's eyes came up. They looked at each other, and that was the moment, right there, though the boy didn't know it yet, and neither quite did the man. Eli's heart was hammering. He'd learned never to speak to the customers. But the smell of that steak had a hook in him now, and he was so tired and so hungry, and the words came out of him small and careful, the way you'd set a foot on ice. "Mister," he said, "may I eat what you didn't finish?" The whole table seemed to go still. The giant did not move. His fork stopped halfway. His eyes went over the boy's face, slow, feature by feature, like a man reading words in a language he'd sworn he'd forgotten. "What did you say your name was?" the giant said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel turning under a wheel. "I didn't, sir." Eli swallowed. "It's Eli." Something happened in the big man's face. Not much, a tightening at the jaw. But it was the kind of small thing that means a great deal is breaking somewhere out of sight. "Eli what?" "Hargrove, sir. Eli Hargrove." The fork went down onto the plate. Careful. The giant's hand, Eli noticed, was shaking just slightly, and that was a strange thing, because a man that size shouldn't have anything in the world to shake about. This is where it turns, believe me. The giant's name was Boone Calloway, and he had been on the cattle trails for the better part of 8 years, and in all that time he had trained himself hard against one particular set of memories. He had a way of doing it. When the memory of her came up, he'd count fence posts, or check a cinch, or find some other man to argue with until it passed. 5 long drives he'd done that. Fort Worth to Dodge. Dodge to Ogallala. Up and back, until the country itself was a blur, and the only steady thing in his life was the mare he rode, an old dun named Juniper, who was waiting for him right now at the rail outside. He had been told that Clara Hargrove died of a fever. He'd been told it plainly, by a man he trusted. In the spring of the year their boy would have been born. He had stood in a field and let the news go through him like a nail. And then he had gone to work, because work was the only thing that ever asked nothing of him and gave nothing back, and that was a fair trade for a man who no longer wanted anything. But here was a boy with a face he knew. Not Clara's face. That would have been easier. It was the other face. The boy had the eyes of Boone's brother, Samuel, who had died at 19 under a horse in a canyon, and had these exact same eyes, gray going toward green, set a little too wide, so that even furious he looked like he was about to laugh. Boone had buried that face with his own hands, and now it was looking up at him out of a starving child, asking for scraps. "Where's your mother, boy?" Boone said. Eli went pale. He'd said too much. He knew the rule and he'd broken it, and now there'd be trouble. "I didn't mean nothing, sir. I'll go. You don't have to give me nothing." "Eli." The giant's voice had gone very quiet and very gentle, which somehow was more frightening than a shout. "I'm not angry with you. I want you to point. Where does she work?" The boy's eyes flicked just once toward the kitchen door. He couldn't help it. And Boone Calloway followed that look across the crowded, smoky room, past the drinkers and the card table and the piano nobody was playing, to the doorway of the kitchen, where a thin woman had just stepped out, drying her hands on her apron, looking for her son because she'd felt him leave her side the way a mother does. She lifted her head, and she saw the giant in the corner, and she saw him looking at her. Clara Hargrove dropped the cloth she was holding. Her hand went to her mouth. And across 40 feet of noise and lamplight, 2 people who had each spent years believing the other one was dead stood absolutely still, while the whole loud world went on without them, not knowing a single thing had changed. For a long moment nobody in that corner breathed. Then Boone Calloway did something that made the men nearest him stop their talk. He stood up, all of him. He pushed his own plate, the full plate, the steak and the beans and the warm bread, across the table until it sat in front of the empty chair opposite. And he looked down at the boy and he said, "Sit down, son. Eat. Eat all of it. You don't ask anybody in this world for their leavings ever again. You hear me?" Eli didn't understand. Nobody had ever given him a whole plate. He looked at it like it might be taken back, and when it wasn't, he climbed up into the chair, and he picked up the fork in his fist the wrong way, and he began to eat fast and desperate, the way starved things eat, while the giant stood over him like a wall between the boy and everything else in the room. For a moment it was almost peaceful. The boy ate. The big man watched him with wet eyes. Clara stood frozen in the doorway with one hand still at her mouth. And it seemed, for the length of a few heartbeats, like the hard part was over, like a plate of food had set something right that had been wrong for a very long time. It hadn't. Of course it hadn't, because Dutch Ferris had been watching from behind the bar. And Dutch Ferris did not like what he was seeing one bit. "Hey," the word cracked across the room. Dutch came around the end of the bar with his sleeves rolled and his face gone dark. "Hey, what's this? Boy, get down off that chair." Eli froze with food in his mouth. His whole body knew that voice. Dutch reached the table and clamped a hand on the back of Eli's neck, not hard enough to hurt where it showed, but hard, and he hauled the boy half out of the chair. "How many times? He don't sit with the customers. He don't eat the plates till they're carried back. You want to give him something, mister, that's between you and me. We can settle a price. He's not a stray for you to feed. He works here. He's got a debt to work off, him and his mother both, and I don't let charity eat into what's owed." And there it is. That's the thing that changes everything, because now it wasn't a man and a boy and a plate of food. Now there was a word on the table that Boone Calloway had not expected, and that word was owed, a debt. His son and the woman he'd mourned for 8 years were not just poor, they were held. They belonged to this man the way the whiskey and the tables belonged to him, and a plate of steak wasn't going to fix that. Nothing that simple was. Boone looked at the hand on his son's neck. He looked at it for a long, long second. "Take your hand off the boy," he said. Something in his tone reached even Dutch, who was not a man given to caution. But Dutch had a room full of his own men, and he had a reputation to keep, and a giant stranger telling him what to do in his own place was a thing he couldn't let stand. "This is my house," he said. "My rules. That boy and that woman owe me $40 against the winter they'd have froze without me, and they'll work it off, and no drifter with trail dust in his beard is going to walk in and—" Boone took his hand off nothing. He simply moved. He set his palm flat against the middle of Dutch Ferris's chest and pushed once, and Dutch went backward into the next table and sat down in a spray of spilled beer and broken glass. It wasn't even violent, quite. It was the way you'd move a gate that was in your road. The whole saloon saw how easy it was, and the whole saloon went quiet, and every one of Dutch's men who'd started to rise thought better of standing all the way up. "Eat, Eli," Boone said, not turning around. "Go on." And the boy, God help him, picked the fork back up. "If you're still with me, and I hope you are, do me one small thing. Hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one, the ones about the people the world tried to throw away, they only get told if folks like you stay to hear them out. That's all I'll ask. Now let's get back to it, because the hardest part is still coming." Clara crossed the room. She came fast now, weaving between the tables, and she reached her son and put both arms around him from behind, and she looked up at the giant with a face full of 8 years of things she'd never said. "Boone," she said. Just that. His name out loud from her mouth, for the first time since the world had told each of them the other was in the ground. "They said you died," Boone said. His voice broke on it. This enormous man, and his voice just came apart in the middle. "Clara, they told me you died of the fever. Coy Latham rode all the way to the Brazos to tell me himself. I stood in a field and I believed him." "Coy Latham," Clara said the name like it tasted of poison. Boone, your uncle paid him to say it. The saloon didn't matter anymore. Dutch didn't matter, dragging himself up out of the broken glass. There was only the space between these two people and the terrible thing that had been done inside it. My uncle, Boone said. He never thought I was good enough. A kitchen girl, you know he never did. Clara's arms tightened around Eli. When I found I was carrying, you were already up the trail. Your uncle came to me. He said you'd written that you didn't want me. He had a letter. It looked like your hand. He gave me $40 and a seat on a coach, and he told me if I ever came back, if I ever tried to put a bastard's claim on the Calloway name, he'd see me in a jail cell and the baby in a county home. I was 17, Boone. I believed the letter. I believed all of it. So I ran. I ran as far as $40 would take me, and that was Dodge, and I've been here ever since. And I never once let myself write to you because I thought you'd thrown us away. I would never. The words came out of Boone like they'd been torn loose. Clara, I would never have thrown you away. I looked for a place to die after they told me. I did 5 drives so I wouldn't have to sit still and think about you. I have carried you every mile of every one of them. She was crying now, so was he. And the boy sat between them with his fork forgotten in his hand, looking up from one face to the other, beginning, in the way children do, to understand a thing before he had the words for it. Eli, Clara said, and turned him gently in the chair so he faced the giant. Eli, honey, this is your father, this is your pa. He didn't leave us. He never even knew. The boy looked up at the mountain of a man standing over him. The man who'd given him the whole plate. The man who'd told him he'd never have to ask for leavings again. You're my pa, Eli said, testing it. Boone Calloway got down on his knees. It took a while, a man that big folding himself down to a child's height. And when he was there, eye to eye with his son for the first time in the boy's whole life, he had to try twice before any words came. I am, he said, I'm your pa, and I am so sorry it took me this long to find you. I'm sorry for every night you went hungry. I'm sorry for every plate you ever had to ask a stranger for. That's over now. You understand, that part of your life is finished tonight. You'll never be hungry again as long as I'm breathing, and I intend to breathe a good while yet. Eli did the thing that broke every hard man in that saloon. He reached out one small hand, still greasy from the steak, and he laid it against the giant's rough cheek, the way his mother laid her hand on his own head in the dark, and he said, "Okay." Just that, okay, as if it were the simplest thing in the world to be found. But it wasn't finished. Not quite. Because Dutch Ferris had gotten his feet under him, and Dutch Ferris was a man who did not know how to lose in his own house, and Dutch Ferris had reached under the bar and come up with a shotgun. $40, Dutch said, and his voice shook and the gun shook, but the gun was pointed. That's the debt. That woman and that boy don't walk out of here on some stranger's say-so. You touch me again, mister. You touch a hair, and I'll drop you where you stand. And there's 20 men here'll swear you drew first. The room drew a single breath and held it. Boone rose up off his knees slow, and he put himself square between the shotgun and his son and the boy's mother, so that all of Dutch's gun was aimed at nothing but the broad wall of him. He did not reach for his own iron. He held his empty hands a little out from his sides, and he looked at Dutch Ferris down the length of that barrel with an expression that had no fear in it at all, and that was the thing that unnerved everyone watching. A scared man you can predict. This one you couldn't. You want $40, Boone said. I want what I'm owed. Boone reached very slowly into his coat. Every man in the room tensed, but it wasn't a gun he brought out. It was a leather roll, worn soft, the kind a trail man keeps his season's wages in. He worked it open one-handed, and he counted, and the only sound in the whole silver spur was the small, clean sound of gold coins being laid down on the wood of the bar, one after another. 40, he said, and set the last one down. Then he counted more. 40 for the debt, and here's 40 on top of it for every plate my boy ever had to beg off a stranger under your roof while you watched and did nothing. And here, he laid the whole rest of the roll down, more money than the silver spur likely cleared in a month. That's for the room, the tables, the whole rotten place. I'm buying it Dutch, right now, tonight. And the first thing I'm going to do as the new owner is throw you out the door I've seen you throw better people through. Dutch's mouth opened. No sound came. Now you can pull that trigger, Boone went on, and his voice never rose, not once. You can pull it and hang for it in front of every witness in this room, over a woman and a child and a stack of money that's already yours if you just set the gun down and walk away a rich man. Or you can be smart for once in your life. Your choice. But you've got about 3 seconds to make it, and I promise you, on my brother's grave and on my boy's eyes, if that barrel doesn't drop, I am going to take it away from you, and I am not going to be gentle. The 3 seconds went by slow as years. Then the shotgun's barrel dipped and dipped again, and Dutch Ferris set it down on the bar beside the gold with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. The whole room let its breath out at once, a long, ragged sound like wind through a fence. Somebody at the card table started to laugh from pure nerves and choked it off. Boone gathered the coins that bought the place and pushed them into Dutch's chest. Take the buyout. Not the debt money, that's mine now. That was always the boys. Just the buyout. And take the road out of Dodge and don't let me see you in this town again. Go on. Dutch went. He grabbed the money and he grabbed his hat and he went out through his own front door into the dark, and that was the last that Saloon ever saw of him. The men at the bar watched him go, and then they turned slow to look at the giant and the thin woman and the small boy in the chair, and one old teamster with a white mustache lifted his glass and said, "Quiet. Well, I'll be damned." And that was the whole benediction, and somehow it was enough, and the piano player finally sat down and started to play soft, because a room can only hold its breath so long. Now here's the part I most want you to hear. They didn't stay in Dodge. Boone signed the silver spur over the very next week to the old teamster with the white mustache, sold it for a fair price and one condition, that no child would ever sweep that floor for scraps again, and the old man shook on it and kept his word for the rest of his days. Then Boone Calloway took his family home. He had land. That was a thing Clara had never known, all those years scrubbing pots in the dark. He had a section of good grass down in the Texas Hill Country, bought slow over 8 lonely years with the wages of a man who had nothing to spend money on because he had nobody to spend it for. A low stone house, a barn, a creek that ran even in the dry months. He'd built it board by board in the winters between drives, and he had never once let himself wonder who he was building it for, because the wondering hurt too much. He knew now. The road south took the better part of 3 weeks. Eli rode most of it up in the saddle in front of his father, wrapped in the big man's coat against the wind, and behind them, patient and unbothered, plodded the old dun mare Juniper, carrying Clara and the little they owned. Juniper was near 20 years old and gray around the muzzle, and she had carried Boone through every mile of every year he'd tried to lose himself, and she seemed to understand in the way old horses do that the running was finished now. On the first night of that ride, camped under more stars than Eli had ever seen from the back of a Dodge City saloon, the boy asked his father a question. He'd been saving it up. "Pa, what happens if you get hungry out here? There's no plates." Boone Calloway laughed, and it was a rusty sound, a laugh he was still learning how to make. He pulled the boy in closer against the fire. "Son," he said, "you listen to me. You are never going to have to think about that again. Not out here, not anywhere. There's a whole herd of my cattle on that grass we're riding to, and a garden your mother's going to grow, and a smokehouse I built with my own 2 hands. You're going to eat until you can't hold another bite, and then you're going to eat again in the morning. And if you ever get to feeling that old hunger, you come find me day or night and I will fix it. That's a promise. You understand me? That's my promise to you, and I have never once in my life broke a promise, though the Lord knows I've had a few broke on me." Eli thought about that. Then he said, "You didn't finish your steak back in the saloon. You gave it all to me." "I did. Weren't you hungry?" Boone looked into the fire a long moment. "I'd been hungry 8 years, son," he said. "Just not for steak. You fixed the kind of hungry I had. Fair trade, I'd say." The boy didn't fully understand that, not yet. But he'd carry the words a long time, and one day, grown, with children of his own on good Texas grass, he would understand them completely, and he'd have to walk out to the porch alone for a while. They came to the stone house on a gold evening in the last week of the ride. Clara stood in the doorway of a home she'd never seen, and had somehow been coming toward her whole life, and she wept, one hand on the frame, while her son ran through the empty rooms shouting to hear his own echo. Boone unsaddled Juniper and turned her loose in the near pasture, and the old mare walked out into the grass and put her head down and grazed, done at last with roads. Boone stood at the fence and watched her a while. He'd made a promise to that horse too once in a bad winter, half froze and half broke and talking to keep himself awake. He'd promised her that if he ever found something worth stopping for, he'd stop. He'd let her rest. He kept that promise the same as all the others. They were poor no more, but that isn't the thing that mattered, and Boone knew it. Money was only the tool that undid what money and lies had done. The thing that mattered was smaller. It was a boy who slept the whole night through now, because there was nothing left to be afraid of in the dark. It was a woman who hummed in a warm kitchen because she wanted to, not because a frightened child needed something to hold on to. It was a plate of food set down in front of a son every single morning, full, and never once taken away. Years later, folks around that county would ask Boone Calloway what turned him from a drifting trail man into the settled sort who never left his land. And the giant would only smile and say that a boy had asked him a question in a saloon one time, a small question, the smallest thing in the world. "May I eat what you didn't finish?" And that he'd been trying, every day since, to make sure his son never had to ask anybody that question ever again. He never did. Eli Hargrove Calloway grew up tall, near as tall as his father, with his dead gray-tuncle Samuel's laughing eyes, and he grew up never once wondering where his next meal would come from. And when the old mare Juniper died at last, gray and easy in the spring grass, it was Eli, grown, who dug the grave beside the creek, because his father's hands had gone stiff with the years, and the two of them stood over it together in the evening light, the giant and the boy who was a giant now, and neither one said very much, because some things a family doesn't need to say out loud. The old man just put his big hand on his son's head, the way the boy's mother once had in the dark, and the boy let him, and the creek ran on the way it always had, even in the dry months, and that was the end of the running, and the whole of the promise kept.